Hi everyone, Elliot Jacobson here, and I'm going to do a short video on a couple of questions I've received via email lately. I've been getting some very interesting questions, and I thought I would just turn these into a video. So what I have done is to put these into the frame so that hopefully you can just read along with me. So let's just go through these questions, and yeah, interesting. Number one, how does one get lost rebate situations from a casino? I've never received this as an offer from a casino from video poker play. In particular, I know Resorts World has been doing this and offering some juicy loss rebates. I'm also not well versed in the theory of how to best exploit such games when betting is small, though I assume the best would be something like $25 a hand or higher video poker on games with high variance, combined with playing until you hit a predetermined win or loss level. So yes, I think you essentially have the gist of it, but let me just explain something to you that's sort of an industry-wide agreement. All the different properties kind of handle it in very similar ways, and that is what they want is money deposited into the casino, wired into some account you keep there. They want to see your funds in the casino, banked, right? And you will be drawing from those funds while you play. And typically when I have worked with corporations, the starting point for being eligible for any sort of loss rebate program, well, when I worked with these places, it was like $150,000, and you might be able to talk them into it at a $50,000 deposit. I don't imagine that you're going to get much with a deposit lower than that. So we are talking about the major corporations operating in Las Vegas, whether it's MGM or Wynn, Venetian, Caesars, whatever the corporation is. Pretty much every corporation has a loss rebate incentive program. And you just have to have enough money on hand to deposit. And oftentimes what will happen is that people will just deposit this money and then just not play very much, right? They will play much smaller wagers than that amount of deposit should sort of justify. So you could imagine depositing $2 million so that you might get a 20% loss rebate at one of these major casinos, and then betting $1,000 a hand or $2,000 a hand when what they'd like to see is a $20,000 bet per hand or something like that at a game. So oftentimes they will scrutinize your play after the fact, but the people who are exploiting loss rebates will make these huge deposits so that they get the full, whatever the max rebate is the casino will offer. And then they will bet small compared to that, and then have win and loss limits for whatever sort of real bankroll they are playing against, which is not the actual bankroll. It's some, virtual bankroll that they are considering. So I just want to say that one of the things I have available to you is on my website, and my website is advancedadvantageplay.com. And if you go to the download section, so across the top, scroll to downloads, you will see that they have some loss rebate. I have some loss rebate spreadsheets there. And if you download the sort of the latest, greatest one you find there, and open that thing up, what you should actually get is something that looks like this right here, where I've actually shown you the full theory on how to maximize your win against a loss rebate incentive. So the areas in green are the things that you fill out. So for example, if you were playing craps, then the house edge on craps would be minus, for example, 0.01414. So that would be a craps house edge. And then what you want to do is maximize your odds, right? So the way you beat loss rebate incentives is by minimizing the house edge and maximizing the variance so that you will tend to win or lose very quickly. So if I were to put in a standard deviation, for example, for 5 times odds, so let's just type in here 5.8240, So then we'll put in a rebate of 20%, which is probably about the most you'll ever get. This actual bankroll number right here, this is for your risk of ruin, which is this bottom number here. And it tells you the chance of losing your entire bankroll playing against this loss rebate using the strategy that I talk about. So let's just assume we have no issue with our bankroll whatsoever. In that case, what these theorems tell us is that if I'm betting, for example, $1,000 a hand, then I should quit playing craps when I've either won 128,000 or lost 138,000. That roughly speaking, about 49% of the time I will win my 128,000, and the rest of the time I'm going to lose my 138,000. My expected number of rounds in order to hit one of these lines is 527, and I can expect a net win of about $6,600 doing this with a standard deviation of 134,000, right? This is wicked variance, but we are playing a high variance game. If we were to look at the same thing with blackjack that has a much smaller house edge, and let's just look at the blackjack that Don Johnson played, that would be this game right here. Then what we do is we put in an edge of minus 0.00332, and we put in a standard deviation of 1.1405. And now we see we're going to win or lose. Again, if we're betting, say, $1,000 a hand, we would quit after winning 21,000 or quit after losing essentially 23,000. And we can see that on average, our expected win will be a little bit over $1,000. Again, we're just talking about $1,000 bets. So that's how this spreadsheet works. And you can just play with this to see what your optimal strategy is for anything that you happen to get playing where you play. So you should not expect a loss rebate incentive unless you're willing to put a lot of money into the cage. Let me just say one more thing. Typically, when you do get a loss rebate incentive, each major corporation also has sort of rules of how you go about using this and other incentives you may be given. And they actually have sort of miniature contracts. So you will sign one of these contracts agreeing to put so much money in the cage and so on. And in return, they will specify very clearly what they will give you. This has sort of evolved over the years. So it used to be the case that there was some more discretion, but now it just turns out that there are so many high rollers, and one high roller talks to another high roller. And if they're not getting exactly the same bang for their buck, you can see that they would very quickly get disgruntled. So they have these sort of fixed contracts. You might be able to get, a free round of golf or negotiate some high level whiskey in your room or whatever, but you're not going to be able to really negotiate the terms of these loss rebate contracts that much. All right, so let's go back to the questions that we were talking about, and the second question that I want to bring up here is this one. Having played in a casino and I showed a big loss and received a good but not wonderful offer. Do you know any tricks to help ensure they continue to send these offers without having to maintain the play level required to first get the offer? If my expected loss from a play is $500 and they send me $600 in free play, that very likely could be sort of a first-time offer. So the offers for first-time players are generally much better than established players. I don't really want to continue the same kind of play because the edge is too small. All right. So what this actually has to do with, there is a method that is used by people, and I am not a really great expert on this method, and so this is really an area I'm not very familiar with, but people do what's called multi-carding. So they essentially create a bunch of accounts, and they might get their friends to, their colleagues at work, whoever, to all give them playing cards, and so each card then, and these are non-gamblers, people who might not otherwise want to do this. Each one of them essentially is getting the new person's offer, right? They're getting that initial amount. And so there are lots of tricks with multi-carding, and I have a video where I interview a fellow named Brandon who talks about multi-carding. You can find that video down in my YouTube area below if you go looking for it. And so multi-carding is a thing. So that's one thing people do to sort of sustain the high level of offers. The other thing people do is they actually, there are some tricks to this that have sort of been well known for a long time. So the person who first talked about getting comps and how you use them and how you can actually make great use of sort of exaggerating your bets or knowing the right time to bet, the right time to step away from the table, understanding how comp systems work and the tiers and all these things and the percentages they give you back. The first person to ever really write that down in any clarity was Max Rubin, who wrote this book called Comp City. And this is mostly out of date now in terms of it being an accurate representation of the systems that you might encounter. But the tricks do remain. They are still very much the same trick that they used to be many, many years ago. So yeah, you want to just look at Comp City, and if you can get a copy, that's great. And you know, it's out of print, so you might have to go to eBay. You might have to buy an old used paper copy. But I think if you look for it, you'll find it. And that would be my resource of choice. So question number 3 is the following. I've been given a coupon to see the dealer's HoleCard in a 4-deck CSM game and wondered when would be the best time to use that HoleCard. They give me some rules of the game, and that's all pretty complicated, but I think this is a really interesting question because essentially we have two things going on here. We have just ordinary basic strategy, which on any given starting hand has a certain house edge. And then we have HoleCard play. And that depends on not only the basic strategy of my 2 cards and the dealer's up card, but also on the dealer's down card. So essentially we have 2 numbers to compare. We want to compare the basic strategy edge with the situation. And then we want to compare the edge over all possible whole cards that might come up with my 2 cards and the dealer's card, right? So for example, if I have a 10 and a 6 and the dealer has a 10 up, well, there's a certain basic strategy edge in hitting, which would be the correct play there. But then based on all the possible dealer cards the dealer might have, and we'll assume they check for blackjack, they don't have an ace. Well, all the dealer cards are either a 10, 9 through a deuce, right? Each of those has a whole card edge. And what we would do is simply take the average over all of those situations, and whatever the resulting edge for whole card play is on average over the possible whole cards, compare that to the basic strategy edge. And we take the difference between those two, and that would be sort of the value of using your whole card coupon in that situation. Now, what we essentially have to do is we have to iterate through every possible starting hand that can happen. And, you know, a 9 and a 3 versus king is a starting hand, right? So we iterate through every starting hand. We iterate through all of the whole cards for each of those starting hands and get the average and compare that to basic strategy. And then what we have to do is look down that list of starting situations, and we have to find the one that has essentially the biggest delta, the biggest change in house edge. And that's where we want to use our coupon. I do not have access to all those numbers for whole card data, certainly not, especially in some situation which is kind of random, which is what you shared, but an extremely interesting question if you could use a whole card once. I am going to take a completely random guess and say that that situation is a pair of 9s against a dealer 10. And the reason is that a pair of 9s against a 10 in general is a very weak starting situation for the player. However, if I know I can split and possibly resplit and double on some of those, which is what I would do whenever the dealer is showing a 2 through a 6 in that situation, suddenly I've turned that weak 9-9 against a 10 into a very strong split with possible doubles after it. Likewise, if the dealer was showing as a whole card a 10, then I have a pair of 9s, right? I might want to hit that 18. I don't know. Maybe I need to split it into 2 9s and keep hitting each 9 individually to try and get to 20. At any rate, I know that I have to chase after that hand that's already beating me. So that's my guess. A pair of 9s against a face card. Purely random guess. Honestly, I don't know what the correct answer is. You would have to do all of the work that I just talked about. All right, one last question. One last question. And this one's a little bit hard to get to. And he says, the reason for the large excess in the last table is because most rounds end with a high value card. And I found that pretty interesting. I had never thought about that before, that most rounds of blackjack end with a high valued card. And let's just see why that is via an example here. So suppose I have, for example, a 5 and a 4 that's been dealt to me, and the dealer has a face card that's up. And this is a fairly common situation. Why might this end in a 10 as the last card? Well, for example, if the next 2 cards in the shoe were a 6 and a jack, then it wouldn't matter what order I hit this hand, I would always end with the jack being the last card, right? Because if I hit a 5 and a 4 and got a 6, I would hit again and bust with the jack. Whereas if I just was dealt the jack first, I would just stand on that, right? So whenever you have a face card and a low card, it's very common that you will hit again if you're dealt the low card and then bust with a high card. And so the same goes for the dealer, who's forced to hit up to 16. If the dealer had a 9, then the dealer would likewise deal himself the 6 and then the jack, or just stand if being dealt the jack. Now, this is not always the case. So for example, if you had an ace and a 2 as your 2 cards, and the dealer had that same face card up, right? Then if you were dealt, for example, a 6, you would stand on that, right? Because an ace 2 and a 6 is a soft 19, but it's still a hand you would stand on there. Whereas if you were dealt that jack with your ace 2, you would have hard 13. You would hit and get the 6 and get 19. So if you have an ace and a 2 against that face card, that exact same situation, you would hit and you would always end on the 6. So this is not necessarily as easy as this person in this email makes it out to be. And I think there's a lot of complexity there. And I actually find this question very useful, because one of the ways online casinos cheat is by manipulating the final card to come out in a round. So they will let everything else be random. You want as much randomness as you possibly can in order to sort of beat the auditor, right? The person who wants to double check for randomness in the cards. And if you simply once in a while alter the final card of the round, maybe once an hour or once every 30 minutes you alter the final card, then that won't skew the data that much, but it will certainly change the winning percentages for the house significantly. So it is something to look for, and it's something I looked for when I would audit these online casinos, was the dealer's down card. Now, what I did not check for was the last card in the round, right? And that would have been really interesting to do. I always check for the dealer's down card to have the right distribution. But this gives another tool for an auditor, and one that had never occurred to me before. So bravo for this question. All right, everyone, that is it. I have answered the 4 questions that were posed to me recently in emails, and yeah, I hope that you found some value here. So, all right, everyone, this is Elliot Jacobson. See you later.